The arrival. It began on a night so still that even the wind seemed to hesitate. The Mauna Kea Observatory, perched high above the clouds of Hawaii, had seen countless celestial wonders. But that night, a faint blip appeared across the screen of an automated sky survey. The astronomers on duty, two tired graduate researchers, initially thought it was a calibration error, a pixel anomaly, maybe a reflection. But when they adjusted the instruments, the dot moved, not with the predictable rhythm of a comet, not with the straight precision of a satellite, something different. Its path bent ever so slightly, as if responding to an unseen force. Within minutes, the data log tagged it automatically. 3I, Atlas. The name carried a quiet weight. 3I, for the third known interstellar object after Oumuamua and Borisov. Atlas, for the system that had found it. Yet what unsettled everyone wasn't the discovery itself, it was its behavior. The trajectory made no sense. Its entry velocity was too controlled, too smooth. Even stranger, there was no visible coma, no debris trail, nothing to suggest it was a natural comet. Instead, it shimmered faintly, its surface alternating between dark reflection and almost metallic brilliance. It was as if it wanted to be seen, but not understood. As word spread through the small network of astronomers awake that night, screenshots began circulating in encrypted channels. The coordinates were precise enough for anyone with a medium telescope to confirm. Within hours, observatories from Chile to South Africa logged sightings. Every report repeated the same anomaly: no cometary activity, no irregular rotation, and a near-perfect deceleration as it approached the inner solar system. Someone joked on a message board that it was Oumuamua's cousin coming back to check on us. Few laughed. The timing, the angle, the silence from NASA's main feed, it all felt orchestrated. By dawn, the object had drawn closer. Its trajectory suggested it wasn't just passing through, it was settling. The software simulation displayed a curve that would bring it dangerously near Earth's orbit within months. "It's not supposed to do that," one of the analysts murmured, eyes fixed on the scrolling telemetry. Another pointed to the light curve, noticing faint fluctuations that pulsed in regular intervals, too regular for chance. A pattern of 16 beats, repeating every 37 seconds. It didn't match rotation. It didn't match reflection from sunlight. It looked intentional. As morning light bathed the Pacific, the observatory's data upload froze. A warning appeared across their console: restricted transmission, awaiting clearance. None of them had seen that before. The line to NASA's deep space network went quiet. Emails bounced back. The data ports, normally open for collaborative review, locked themselves automatically. Somewhere in the command chain, someone had flipped a switch. By midday, social media caught the scent. Amateur astronomers posted blurred images, each more speculative than the last. Some called it a fragment of an ancient interstellar craft. Others claimed it was an asteroid rich in unknown metals. A few fringe channels began whispering that it had changed direction slightly toward Earth. Most dismissed it as internet hysteria, but in observatory control rooms across the world, the tension was real. The numbers didn't lie. The object's motion wasn't passive, it was deliberate. In the following hours, a team from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory issued a terse statement. "We are observing 3I, Atlas, as part of a standard monitoring operation. At this time, no unusual properties are confirmed." But buried within NASA's own timestamp logs, there was a missing block, nearly 3 hours of data unaccounted for. When a junior technician asked about it, his supervisor told him quietly, "Don't file a query, that's above clearance. Be not sty." Meanwhile, in a dimly lit room at the European Space Agency, astrophysicist Dr. Lina Vasari stared at the spectrographic data. The light signature didn't align with any known mineral. It resembled alloys produced only under artificial manufacturing. She sent her findings to her contact at NASA, encrypted and cautious. Within an hour, her message vanished from the thread, replaced by a bland "file not found" notice. Her system log showed remote access from a Washington, D.C. IP range. That night, Dr. Vasari stood outside her office balcony, eyes lifted to the same sky she had studied since childhood. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a silent object watched back, glinting faintly against the stars. For a fleeting moment, she felt a pull, an instinctive awareness that whatever it wasn't just a visitor, it had come for something. Or someone. The discovery of 3I, Atlas, would soon spiral into the greatest astronomical mystery of the decade, and though the public believed it was just another piece of rock hurtling through space, those who had seen the raw data knew better. The first whispers began circulating among private chat groups of scientists, journalists, and intelligence consultants. If it's not a comet, what is it? And why now? It is not Makar. In the silence that followed, the sky over Earth seemed to hum with invisible eyes. Somewhere deep in NASA's restricted archives, a file named Project Atlas Re-entry, Level 9 clearance only, was quietly reactivated for the first time since 1987. A strange signature. When the world slept, the observatories did not. Across long nights and flickering screens, a handful of scientists watched the numbers roll in, and with every new set of coordinates, the story of 3I, Atlas, grew stranger. Its motion through the solar system was almost fluid, a slow curve that betrayed purpose rather than accident. Yet the deeper they looked, the less sense it made. Dr. Lena Vasari hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her desk was cluttered with empty coffee cups and scattered printouts of light curves, each line twisting like a heartbeat recorded in starlight. She couldn't stop staring at the fluctuations. The object's brightness didn't simply change as it rotated. It pulsed, like the rhythm of something alive, or the steady beat of an instrument responding to data we couldn't hear. Her assistant, Thomas, leaned over her shoulder. "Maybe it's tumbling irregularly," he said, trying to sound casual, though his voice trembled. "Metallic reflection, solar glare." "No," she interrupted softly, tracing the repeated intervals with her pen. "Look, 37 seconds exactly. Not 36.8, not 37.1. Every single time. That's a transmission pattern, not a rotation." Thomas didn't answer. Outside the observatory's wide windows, the stars shimmered faintly. Somewhere in that expanse, 3I Atlas drifted on its silent path, an object smaller than a mountain, colder than any world, and yet not still. When the early data reached the NASA Deep Space Network, something unusual happened. Normally, every observation was automatically logged in a shared archive accessible to international partners. This time, the entry existed for less than an hour before disappearing. Later, a corrected version replaced it, stripped of the original spectral data. The new file showed a perfectly ordinary comet, rocky, inert, and non-reflective. It was almost insultingly mundane. Yet the independent astronomers who had saved copies of the first version noticed the edits immediately. The difference wasn't subtle, it was deliberate. By the third day after discovery, murmurs began spreading through encrypted channels of researchers who had seen the unaltered files. One technician from JPL, writing under a pseudonym, described what looked like mirror-like panels glinting on the object's surface, sharp geometric angles unlike anything formed naturally. He attached a fragment of radar return data showing what appeared to be straight lines. The email vanished from the server within minutes. Dr. Vasari received a message that night from an old colleague in Madrid. "You're not the only one seeing the pattern. Someone doesn't want this data public. Back up everything." She did. Every chart, every reading, every faint trace of reflected light stored on a disconnected drive and hidden beneath a stack of old star maps in her office. She wasn't paranoid, not yet, but she could feel it, the slow tightening of invisible strings around the truth. Then came the radio echoes. At the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia, a group of amateur radio astronomers monitoring background noise picked up a repeating tone at 1,420 megahertzes, the hydrogen line, the universal frequency for cosmic communication. It wasn't a direct transmission, but a reflected echo, like a faint copy of Earth's own radio chatter bouncing back from the object. The signals carried fragments of terrestrial frequencies, television broadcasts, satellite pings, even encrypted military bursts, all distorted, mirrored, and faintly delayed. "It's like it's listening," one of them said, staring at the readout, "and sending it back. It's bingelow." NASA denied the finding within hours, calling it signal contamination from atmospheric interference. Yet that night, the same echo was detected again, stronger this time, cleaner. Each pulse mirrored a moment of transmission from Earth, almost as if 3I, Atlas, was collecting data and returning it in packets. And then, on the fifth night, the reflection pattern changed. The 37-second pulse vanished, replaced by a sequence of shorter intervals, 11, 7, and 3 seconds apart. It was rhythmic, mathematical, almost like counting down. At 2:14 UTC, the pulse stopped entirely. The radar readings froze. Every instrument pointed toward the coordinates recorded total silence. Then, without warning, a faint optical flare erupted from the object's position bright enough to saturate sensors across 3 continents. The flare lasted exactly 6 seconds, then faded into black. When the systems came back online, the object's velocity had dropped by another fraction, too sharp a deceleration for any natural phenomenon. It was slowing down again, approaching an orbital resonance near Earth's plane. By morning, official channels referred to it as a dust ejection anomaly. But the internal data, shared quietly between a handful of trusted scientists, showed something else, a shift in trajectory so precise it could only have been engineered. Dr. Vasari called her contact at the European Space Agency again, but the number was disconnected. Her emails bounced back, marked "address not found." When she called the ESA switchboard, the operator told her no one by that name worked there. She felt a coldness in her chest. People didn't just vanish, not from a major research agency. Meanwhile, in a forgotten corner of the internet, conspiracy forums caught wind of the anomalies. Threads exploded with speculation. Some believed 3I, Atlas, was a derelict alien probe, left to drift until it found intelligent life again. Others thought it was an ancient human artifact, evidence of a civilization far older than recorded history. The most popular theory, though, was that NASA knew the truth and was covering it up. As wild as they sounded, each theory carried a grain of unease. The numbers, the silences, the missing data, all of it formed a shadow too coherent to ignore. Late that evening, Dr. Vasari stood once more under the open sky. The Pacific air smelled of salt and silence. Through her small portable telescope, she found it a faint speck of reflected light, steady and deliberate. She zoomed in, her breath catching as she noticed a tiny fluctuation in brightness, a glimmer that almost looked like movement. For the first time, she whispered aloud what everyone had begun to fear but no one dared to publish. "It's watching us." Somewhere deep in NASA's restricted servers, lines of code updated quietly, assigning 3I, Atlas, a new classification tag, Observation Candidate, Level 9 Security. The next morning, all live tracking feeds went dark. The hidden transmission. The night sky over Hawaii was unusually clear when the signal first broke through. At the Haleakala Observatory, a soft hum filled the equipment bay, the kind that doesn't come from machines but from something reaching across the void. The technicians were running routine calibration sweeps on the 3I, Atlas coordinates. Nothing fancy, just another long exposure meant to refine its rotation curve. Then the spectrum analyzer went wild. It started as static, a rush of cosmic background hiss that usually meant nothing. But buried within it was a distinct, rhythmic tone, steady, pulsing, and low, like a heartbeat recorded through metal. The amplitude rose sharply, plateaued for 7 seconds, then dropped off entirely. A minute later, it repeated. At first, the team dismissed it as interference from ground-based radar. Yet, when they cross-referenced the timing, no terrestrial transmission matched the signal. It wasn't coming from Earth. It was bouncing to Earth from the direction of 3I, Atlas itself. Dr. Lena Vasari received the raw feed an hour later. Her encrypted relay from Haleakala had become her lifeline. She'd learned not to trust the official data channels. She opened the file, set the playback speed to normal, and listened through noise filters. What emerged was not random static. The tones formed intervals, repeating prime numbers, spaced with perfect precision. It was the same pattern Carl Sagan had once theorized as the universal signature of intelligence. She sat frozen, the headphones pressed tight to her ears, her mind racing. No comet produced that. No natural body could. It wasn't a reflection, wasn't radio chatter, wasn't coincidence. Someone or something was sending a message. She immediately composed a report, careful to phrase it as an anomalous, periodic interference requiring verification. She encrypted the file and sent it to a select list of colleagues she still trusted, along with the recorded sequence. Within an hour, her secure connection flickered. The outgoing message disappeared. Then the entire local network crashed. When she rebooted, a system notice blinked across the screen. Unauthorized data transfer detected. Security protocol engaged. She tried again, using a private satellite uplink from her phone. The network refused connection. Someone or something was intercepting her communications. That same night, in a basement lab at Stanford University, radio engineer Caleb Rowan was performing a cross-spectrum analysis of deep space reflections. He wasn't affiliated with NASA, nor was he supposed to have access to their frequency data, but the astronomy community was small, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. When Rowan filtered the same hydrogen line frequency that Haleakala had logged, he found it too, the pulse sequence. He recorded it, looped it, slowed it down. On the 12th playback, his instruments registered a faint modulation buried inside each pulse, like a subcarrier frequency hidden within the carrier wave. Using custom software, he demodulated it. What appeared on his screen wasn't noise. It was a waveform, binary clusters, spaced in perfect 8-bit intervals. The beginning sequence matched no known encoding standard. It wasn't ASCII, wasn't UTF, wasn't machine code, but the structure, the ordered symmetry, meant it wasn't random. He stared at the pattern for an hour before realization struck. It wasn't language, it was image data. He converted the binary into grayscale pixels, mapping it line by line. The result made his breath catch. Amid the static grain of the display, faint outlines appeared. Arcs, circular gradients, something resembling planetary curvature. The upper right corner contained a patch of higher contrast points forming a rough constellation. He compared it against known star charts. It was Earth's southern hemisphere, viewed from roughly 0.3 AU away the current position of 3I, Atlas. The object wasn't merely reflecting signals, it was scanning. Rowan didn't sleep that night. By dawn, he'd cross-checked the timing intervals. Every pulse corresponded to the moment Earth rotated beneath the object's field of observation. It wasn't broadcasting randomly, it was sending back data packets aligned with our planet's rotation. He uploaded his findings to a secure forum used by astrophysicists and radio engineers under the pseudonym Spectra Null. The post went live at 6:11 UTC. At 6:27, the server went offline. When it came back an hour later, the post was gone. So were his credentials. Meanwhile, in Geneva, the European Space Operations Centre issued a temporary suspension of all non-essential communications regarding interstellar objects. The internal memo, later leaked anonymously, cited possible foreign interception risk. That was the first official acknowledgement that something or someone was monitoring their channels. Dr. Vasari received an unexpected call from an old contact in the US agent Mark Delaney, formerly attached to NASA's Orbital Anomalies Division. His voice was calm, but clipped. "Lena, listen carefully. You didn't imagine the signal. It's real, but you need to stop looking into it. The source is under classification now." She froze. "Classification? Under what authority?" "Joint Directive. Level Omega. You won't find it in any open archive. The data is now blacklisted. It's being handled under national security." "Why? What did they find?" There was a pause. Then, quietly, "It's not just watching us, it's listening through us." The line went dead. That phrase haunted her. Listening through us. She rechecked the data from Greenbank, the echoes that mirrored Earth's transmissions. If the object wasn't just reflecting but amplifying and modulating them, it could be learning, building a profile of our electromagnetic footprint, communications, weather radar, even encrypted signals. A planetary signature, compressed and streamed outward into deep space. Hours later, she noticed something new. The most recent echo sequence contained faint distortions, slight frequency warps that didn't exist before. When she overlaid them against archived transmissions from Earth, the distortions matched terrestrial broadcast frequencies, television, radio, GPS bands, shifted by fractions of a hertz. It was sending back what it heard, but altered, like a mimic testing its own reflection. The following day, every major observatory in the world received a directive from NASA and ESA. All data regarding 3I Atlas was to be routed exclusively through classified channels. Civilian observation requests were denied. Live telemetry feeds were cut. For the first time since its discovery, 3I Atlas became invisible to the public eye. In online circles, rumors spread like wildfire. People claimed they could still intercept faint radio pulses from the hydrogen line frequency, though most recordings were hoaxes. A few, however, contained authentic signatures nearly identical to what Rowan and Vasari had analyzed. Each one grew shorter, tighter, as if compressing its information. And then, on the 11th night after discovery, the pulses stopped entirely. Every telescope pointed toward the object, recorded nothing. No optical glint, no radar echo, just silence. For 43 minutes, 3I, Atlas was gone. When it reappeared, its orbit had changed, slightly adjusted, bringing it closer to the Earth-Moon system. Not enough to cause alarm, just enough to make it clear. The movement wasn't random, it was intentional. From that point forward, NASA never publicly mentioned 3I, Atlas again, and somewhere, beneath the hum of data servers and blacked-out transmissions, the question whispered through the small network of those who still dared to look: if it's sending data back into space, who or what is it reporting to? NASA's silence. The morning after the signal blackout, the halls of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory felt like the air itself had been thinned. People spoke in murmurs, glancing over their shoulders before whispering a word. Monitors that had once streamed the rhythmic pulse of 3I, Atlas now displayed only blank telemetry grids and a single line of text: access restricted under Directive AO99. Nobody admitted to knowing what that meant, but everyone understood what it implied: that something had been found, something too large or too dangerous for open discussion. Dr. Lena Vasari, though thousands of miles away, could feel the echo of that silence. Every inquiry she sent through official channels returned the same automated response: your data request has been archived pending classification review. Each message ended with a new code stamped in the header: Omega Tier Handling. Even her most trusted contact in Pasadena, software engineer David Heller, had stopped replying. Then one evening, she received a text from an unlisted number: don't contact me again. They're monitoring queries linked to Atlas. You didn't hear that from me. At first, she thought it was paranoia. Then her home internet began flickering at odd hours, always when she attempted to access archived observatory data. Twice, she caught her computer's webcam light turning on by itself. A part of her wanted to dismiss it as a software bug. Another part remembered the last words she'd heard from Agent Delaney: it's listening through us. Into Camry. Meanwhile, in Washington, a small team inside NASA's Office of Planetary Defense received a sealed update from the Intelligence Coordination Group. The report's cover bore no title, only the designation Atlas R4, printed in stark black ink. Inside, a single sentence summarized the current status: Object 3I. Atlas reclassified as non-natural. Observation and data dissemination now subject to interagency clearance. Civil tracking prohibited. The rest of the file was redacted. For those who still had partial access, confusion turned to unease. The raw telemetry logs had been replaced with synthetic data streams, false values simulating the object's position as if it were a harmless comet. The coordinates were close enough to seem plausible, but off by several arc-seconds from independent observations. To anyone outside the classified circle, it would look perfectly ordinary. That was the point. Inside Mission Control, technicians were told to continue routine monitoring, but avoid running analysis scripts. Engineers were ordered not to discuss the anomaly, even among themselves. One analyst later described it as working in a ghost lab, everybody staring at numbers we weren't allowed to question. In the nod as Murray. And yet, questions spread like cracks in glass. Why would NASA classify a comet? Why seal public data? Why issue gag orders on an object supposedly drifting harmlessly past Earth? By the end of the week, rumors leaked through internal emails and private group chats. Someone had whispered that a shortwave transmission originating from the direction of 3I, Atlas, had been intercepted by a deep space network antenna in Canberra. The message was encrypted, routed automatically to a higher clearance node, and immediately erased from all local logs. Only one fragment survived in a cached buffer before the system purge. Signal packet confirmed. Return link established. Not we word avflam. Those 4 words spread through the underground astronomy community like wildfire. Return link established. To many, it sounded like a conversation, like someone, somewhere, was communicating with the object. Then came the media freeze. Every press inquiry about 3I, Atlas, was redirected to a single spokesperson at NASA headquarters, who repeated the same phrase: all current observations indicate natural behavior, consistent with known interstellar bodies. Yet, journalists noticed that every archived NASA statement about the object had been quietly edited or deleted. News outlets that tried to dig deeper found their access revoked from media briefings. For a few days, it seemed the story would die another mystery, buried beneath bureaucracy. But scientists talk, even when they shouldn't. An internal email from a JPL data analyst eventually leaked to an independent science forum. The message was simple, almost desperate. They're calling it an artifact of unknown manufacture. It's hollow inside. Reflectivity maps show uniform geometry. We're not allowed to model it anymore. Within hours, that post vanished. The user's account was suspended, and the thread was deleted. At the same time, inside the walls of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, a quiet storm brewed. A small team of specialists, data engineers, astrophysicists, and signal analysts had been reassigned from ongoing projects without explanation. They worked in a sealed operations suite with no external network connection, known informally as the Vault. Their task, whispered among those who'd heard of it, was to study the Atlas transmission phenomena. Inside that vault, the team confirmed what many feared. The object's reflective emissions weren't random. They exhibited phase modulation consistent with encoded data packets, compressed signals that mirrored Earth-originating frequencies but inverted their phase harmonics. In layman's terms, 3I, Atlas wasn't just reflecting Earth's electromagnetic noise, it was reorganizing it, as though storing or retransmitting a filtered version. A junior analyst later told a colleague, "It's like it's editing the planet's voice before sending it home." But where was home? NASA's response was swift and brutal. The team's access badges were deactivated overnight. Their workstations were confiscated. The lead researcher, Dr. Marcus UN, disappeared quietly under medical leave. None of them ever returned to their regular posts. The vault was sealed. Meanwhile, outside official walls, amateur astronomers continued their own vigil. Some had saved data before the blackout. Others kept tracking with private instruments. They noticed that the object's brightness curve had changed again, no longer constant but pulsing faintly every 24 hours, synchronized almost perfectly with Earth's rotation. A slow blink, one planet-sized heartbeat after another. When confronted by the media, NASA denied any connection. But the denials came slower each time, more mechanical, as if pre-approved by someone far beyond the public affairs office. Then, suddenly, even the denials stopped. For nearly 2 weeks, NASA made no public mention of 3I Atlas. Their official feeds carried stories of Mars missions, lunar logistics, and weather satellite updates, but not a single word about the interstellar visitor that had captured humanity's imagination just days before. Lena Vasari watched from afar as the silence deepened. She had spent her career believing in transparency, in the open exchange of knowledge between nations. Now, she sat in her office, surrounded by locked files and blacked-out screens, realizing that knowledge had become property and someone had claimed ownership of the truth. When she reached out to Agent Delaney again, her message returned undelivered. The secondary channel she'd used went offline. For a week, nothing. Then, one night, a physical envelope arrived at her home address with no return label. Inside was a single printed image, grainy, monochrome, but unmistakable. 3I, Atlas, viewed under high-resolution radar imaging. Its surface was smooth, polished, symmetrical. Across the bottom, in faint typewriter ink, were 4 words. "It's not alone yet." Lena's hands trembled. The paper smelled faintly of ozone, as though it had been printed in a sealed lab. Outside, the night sky shimmered faintly, and though she could not see it, she knew 3I. Atlas was still there, silent, patient, watching. And somewhere in NASA's hidden archives, a new internal status was logged beside its name. Observation suspended, awaiting further instruction. Leaked documents. It began, as such things often do, with a single misplaced file in an internal NASA repository that wasn't supposed to exist outside of a high-security subnet. Somewhere between late-night data syncing and the automated mirroring of drives, a directory labeled Ops, Atlas, SEC, Archive, was accidentally exposed to a lower clearance partition. For precisely 17 minutes, before the error was noticed and corrected, that folder was visible to a handful of contractors working remotely under subcontract for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. One of them was a systems analyst named Evan Mercer, a quiet, methodical man who rarely spoke in meetings and preferred to work long after everyone else had logged off. Mercer had no real connection to planetary science. His job was to maintain the cloud storage architecture. But when he saw the strange directory with SEC in its name, curiosity overrode caution. He clicked it open. Inside were only 3 files. A text summary labeled Atlas, Summary 0, Regions, TXT, a compressed telemetry log, and a scanned memo stamped with an old NASA seal and a classification header that hadn't been used since the late Cold War era Cosmic Observation Act, Level 9. The memo's date stopped him cold. The 17th of May, 1987, nearly 4 decades earlier. The language was bureaucratic and cold. Per directive from the Joint Advisory Council, the re-entry of object designated Atlas Mirror is to be suppressed from public notice. Original prototype classified as non-deployed asset. In event of reappearance, treat under non-terrestrial origin hypothesis pending confirmation. Non-terrestrial origin hypothesis. Mercer read the line again, his pulse quickening. The memo went on to reference previous contact scenarios and observation behavior consistent with pre-programmed surveillance routines. In the margins, someone had scribbled in pen, "Still transmitting. Not debris. Awaiting trigger." He copied everything. A single drag and drop to an encrypted drive, hidden in a directory of weather satellite backups. By the time IT caught the exposure, the window had closed, but the seed of revelation had already been planted. Within days, snippets of the leaked memo began appearing across encrypted discussion forums, their authenticity questioned but never disproven. The wording was too specific, the formatting too precise to be a fabrication. The notion that NASA had known of something called Atlas Mirror since 1987 spread like wildfire. When Mercer realized what he'd unleashed, it was already too late. His access credentials were revoked, his employment terminated pending investigation, and his home was quietly visited by 2 plainclothes agents who confiscated his devices. But he had already uploaded the files to an offshore repository, accessible only via coded link. From there, they spread like digital ghosts, copied, mirrored, and archived by hundreds who didn't even understand what they were looking at. Soon, more documents surfaced. One, labeled Comms, Blackout, Protocol, AO99, outlined emergency procedures for containment of public communications during observation events involving potential artifacts of artificial manufacture. Another file referenced Operation Atlas Re-entry, a project supposedly shut down in the 1,980 seconds due to anomalous feedback signatures. These weren't hoaxes. The metadata, the formatting, the file headers, everything matched NASA's internal documentation structure. Some of the PDFs even contained invisible watermarking that, when analyzed, traced back to genuine government printers. Lena Vasari came across the leak only by chance, forwarded through a trusted colleague at the European Space Agency, who had access to the dark science sharing circles where whistleblowers quietly traded data like relics of forbidden truth. She read the memo 3 times, each word sinking deeper into her mind like cold iron. If the document was genuine, it implied that 3I, Atlas, wasn't the first of its kind. That decades before, NASA had already known of a similar object one deliberately constructed and left adrift. The name, Atlas Mirror, echoed through her head. Mirror. The idea chilled her. What if it wasn't just an observer? What if it was designed to reflect, to copy, to record? She scrolled further down the memo and found a faintly scanned diagram. An oblong structure, smooth on one side, ridged along the rear, identical in proportion to the 3I, Atlas model, currently hidden under classification. The notes described a metallic composite capable of self-correcting trajectory through micro-emission propulsion, and a surface layer described as reflective adaptive alloy, composition unknown. And then, a single handwritten annotation beside it. If recovered, do not attempt to signal. Responds autonomously. Lena's stomach turned. It wasn't alien discovery, it was return. She began reaching out to contacts who had quietly followed the 3I Atlas story despite the blackout. A retired JPL orbital engineer named Robert Chen, who claimed he'd seen similar project files in the 1,990 seconds under a different name, Mirrorwatch. An ex-CIA analyst who remembered briefing notes about deep orbit assets of unknown origin during the last days of the Cold War. Each of them told her the same thing. NASA had lost something decades ago. Something they didn't build, but studied, copied, and then tried to hide. Then, 2 days after the leak, a 30-second audio clip appeared on an anonymous upload board. It was scratchy, filtered, and heavily distorted, but the metadata listed its origin as an encrypted relay node belonging to the Deep Space Network. The voice was male, tense, recorded through radio interference. Control to Atlas node. Transmission received. Confirming stable orbit. Initiating reactivation sequence. Stand by for mirror alignment. Then silence. That clip alone might have been dismissed as a hoax, if not for one detail. The background static carried the exact same modulation pattern as the earlier 3i Atlas signal. It wasn't a coincidence, it was communication. Soon, the major news networks began circling the story. Independent journalists demanded answers from NASA, but all official channels responded with the same short denial. The documents currently circulating online are falsified. There is no classified project related to the object known as 3i Atlas. Yet behind closed doors, in conference rooms dimly lit by the glow of projection screens, the agency wasn't denying anything. They were investigating how the files had escaped and who else might have seen them. In Geneva, Lena began receiving encrypted messages from untraceable senders. Each contained fragments of technical jargon, coordinates, timestamps. One contained a single sentence that made her blood run cold. Mirror activation corresponds to Earth's electromagnetic threshold. They're listening for our signal. The implication was horrifying. If 3i Atlas was not just observing but waiting, what would happen when the threshold was reached? And then came the final leak. A memo dated the 14th of April 2025, barely 2 weeks old, marked for eyes of the administrator only. It read, based on recent telemetry, Object 3i Atlas exhibits data transmission consistent with past events under codename Atlas Mirror. The possibility of linked origin is under active investigation. Recommend continued suppression until confirmation of communication endpoint. It was signed by a senior NASA administrator, name redacted, but the initials at the bottom were unmistakable. M.D. Mark Delaney, the man who had warned Lena months earlier to stop digging. Her hands trembled as she read it again. If Delaney was still involved, then the truth was not lost. It was being controlled, shaped, maybe even rewritten. Outside, the night sky glowed faintly red with atmospheric haze, but Lena could see one point of light brighter than the rest. It blinked once, slow, deliberate, as though acknowledging her gaze, and somewhere in the silence between the stars, the 3i Atlas probe waited for its next command. Echoes from Oumuamua. Long before 3i Atlas appeared, the world had already faced a mystery that refused to die. In late 2017, when the first interstellar visitor Oumuamua swept through the inner solar system, it had baffled scientists and electrified the public. Its shape, motion, and speed defied every model. It had no coma, no typical cometary outgassing, yet it accelerated, as though propelled by something unseen. The official explanations, radiation pressure, gas jets, dust fragmentation, never fit perfectly. Then, as abruptly as it came, it was gone, vanishing into the black beyond the orbit of Jupiter. The debates faded, but they never truly ended. For a few, Oumuamua wasn't an accident of physics. It was a message in motion. Now, in 2025, that conversation returned with a vengeance. After the 3i Atlas leaks, a handful of astrophysicists began comparing archived Oumuamua data against the new blacklisted telemetry recovered from the leaks. The similarities were staggering. Both objects shared nearly identical acceleration curves, smooth, controlled, as if obeying a pre-programmed course. Both exhibited anomalous reflectivity patterns, inconsistent with natural composition. Even the rotational precession's subtle oscillations in their spin matched almost exactly, though separated by nearly a decade. To the scientists who dared to look deeper, it was as if 3i Atlas were not a random visitor at all, but a successor. At first, the academic papers appeared quietly. A team from Prague's Astronomical Institute submitted a preprint comparing the phase-light variation symmetries between the two bodies. Within 12 hours, the paper was withdrawn. The authors issued a statement claiming errors in calibration. Another physicist at Caltech who spoke publicly about common engineering geometry between Oumuamua and 3i Atlas found his university email suspended for security audit compliance. But the data didn't disappear completely. Screenshots circulated privately, plots showing uncanny parallels, identical changes in brightness, matching acceleration vectors, and a shared spectral dip around 857 nanometers, consistent with reflective alloy compounds. Lena Vasari, reviewing the documents late one night, felt the pieces lock into place with terrifying precision. Both Oumuamua and 3I, Atlas had entered the solar system on trajectories aligned with the galactic plane paths too narrow to be coincidence. Each one had decelerated slightly as it neared Earth's orbital distance, as though scanning, observing, adjusting. Then, both had shifted trajectories in ways that no comet or asteroid could naturally achieve. When she compared the leaked Atlas mirror diagram from 1987 with an enhanced radar composite of Oumuamua, she noticed something chilling. The two shared not only dimensions but design logic: a long, spindle-like body, one smooth surface, one textured. The ratio of length to width, exactly 10:1, was identical. She wrote in her private log, "If Oumuamua was the first observer, Atlas is the second. They are not separate events, they are stages." But stages of what? To find out, she contacted Robert Chen, the retired JPL engineer who had once hinted about Mirror Watch. Chen agreed to meet her in person in a small cafe outside Los Angeles, far from any university networks or surveillance risk. He arrived late, pale and visibly nervous, carrying a worn leather folder. He didn't speak at first, just opened the folder and laid out several faded blueprints across the table. "These," he whispered, "were from the Mirror Watch program. 1986, maybe 87. We weren't supposed to call it that, but everyone did. The project started when deep space monitoring stations picked up anomalous radar echoes from beyond Neptune. The pattern repeated every few years. We thought it was cosmic interference until we found a physical object responding to the radar itself." Lena leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "Responding?" He nodded. "Our transmissions bounced back, but slightly altered. They contained data we never sent, like it was recording our radar and replying with an edited version. The structure was small, only a few hundred meters long, metallic, symmetrical. It appeared for a few weeks, then vanished." "And you called it Atlas Mirror?" "How's Star and how's Pruvik. That was the internal name after it disappeared. We assumed it was destroyed or left orbit, but someone higher up believed it would return or be replaced. They built predictive models, tracking trajectories across decades. According to those models, something matching its behavior was expected around 2017. "Oumuamua," Lena whispered. "Exactly. But we didn't have clearance to connect the dots. By then, NASA had purged most of the data. Only a few people knew the pattern continued. That's why when 3I Atlas showed up, some of us knew right away it wasn't new. It was the next cycle." Lena stared at the diagrams. "So, Oumuamua wasn't an isolated object. It was part of a repeating sequence. A system." Chen folded his hands. "A network. That's what they feared most. A self-replicating network of observation probes seeded across the galaxy. Each one programmed to relay what it sees back to its origin or to its successor." She felt a chill ripple through her. "And what happens when the last one finishes observing?" He looked away. "No one knows. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." A few days later, Lena received a message from an encrypted address with no traceable metadata. It contained a single file, a heavily corrupted image reconstructed from radar echoes of Oumuamua. When she filtered the noise, faint lines emerged across its surface, geometric engravings forming a pattern of concentric circles, each one intersected by precise angular lines like coordinates. When she overlaid those coordinates on a galactic map, they pointed toward one region near the constellation Cygnus, the same direction from which both Oumuamua and 3I Atlas had entered. The realization hit her like a blow. These weren't random drifters from interstellar space. They were coming from somewhere specific, and the design symmetry suggested something deeper: communication not between humanity and the unknown, but between the probes themselves. Every object, like Oumuamua or 3I Atlas, might not only observe us, but also pass data to the next one, each acting as a link in a chain spanning centuries. A slow, deliberate relay of planetary surveillance. Then came the most disturbing discovery. Buried within the leaked 1987 Atlas Mirror file was a reference to an event logged under transmission response number 004 UMU. The corresponding note read, "Return, signature identified, possible acknowledgement received, response encoded in prime series repetition." Lena recognized the prime number modulation immediately. It was identical to the one Haleakala had detected from 3I Atlas only weeks earlier. That meant this acknowledgement had already happened once before, nearly 40 years ago, when the European Space Agency's archives from the late 1982 were rechecked. An unexplained blackout appeared in exactly the same time window as the UMU transmission. For 47 minutes, just as with the later 3I Atlas blackout, telescopes had lost visual contact with the sky sector where the first object was last observed. It wasn't coincidence. It was repetition. She sent her findings to a small circle of trusted scientists scattered across Europe, encoded within image files to avoid detection. One replied simply, "The probes are not visitors, they are auditors." "To mean restalk?" The word unsettled her deeply. Auditors implied a purpose, a standard to measure by. What was being measured? Earth's technology, biology, civilization, or perhaps its readiness? Meanwhile, NASA maintained its wall of silence. But the leaked metadata from their classified archives hinted at a new project title, circulating quietly among senior researchers: Project Echo. It appeared to reference historical patterns of inbound objects from Cygnus vector, exhibiting behavioral symmetry. Project Echo. Echoes from Oumuamua. If Oumuamua was the first whisper, 3I Atlas was the response. That night, Lena returned to her telescope. Through the pale shimmer of the atmosphere, she located the faint glint where 3I Atlas drifted silently among the stars. It no longer looked like a dot of light. It looked like a mirror, tilted, aware, and waiting. As she stared, the object flared once, faint but undeniable. Not random, not a trick of the eye. A pulse. It was the same interval, 37 seconds. The same rhythm that had begun everything. Only this time, she realized, it wasn't broadcasting into space. It was aimed at Earth. Anomalies multiply. For weeks, the sky refused to be still. Observatories from Chile to Japan began reporting subtle irregularities in the orbital tracking data of 3I Atlas, small deviations, minute accelerations that defied gravity's clean arithmetic. What should have been a stable, predictable trajectory had begun to ripple, like something unseen was adjusting the object's path, guiding it, nudging it into new positions with the precision of a surgeon. It was Dr. Lena Vasari who first noticed the deeper pattern. Her personal tracking software, built in secret after NASA's data lockdown, compiled thousands of independent observations. When she fed them into her model, a horrifying symmetry emerged. Every course correction made by 3I Atlas corresponded to a geographic alignment on Earth. Cities, oceanic monitoring stations, deep radar outposts. Each subtle change in trajectory brought the object into direct line of sight with another key node in humanity's global communications grid. It wasn't just orbiting, it was mapping. At first, Lena thought the model was a coincidence, a trick of overfitting. But then she noticed the time intervals. Every shift in the probe's position occurred at precisely the same hour, 2:14 UTC, regardless of Earth's rotation or orbital position. A fixed timestamp, detached from any natural rhythm. Whatever was controlling 3I Atlas was operating on its own internal schedule, not ours. Meanwhile, inside NASA's silent offices, unease was spreading. Those still working under clearance-level protocols described an invisible pressure hanging over the teams. Engineers who questioned inconsistencies in the official trajectory reports were reassigned to auxiliary projects. Software analysts found their access credentials revoked without warning. One night, a low-level data technician leaked a string of raw telemetry lines to a small astronomy forum. Hidden among them was a single notation from the Deep Space Network logs: autonomous correction observed, vector stabilized. Source: internal emission. The phrase internal emission became legend overnight. It suggested that 3I Atlas wasn't reacting to outside forces, it was propelling itself. NASA issued a terse denial, citing data misinterpretation. Yet, a week later, the European Southern Observatory's radar arrays confirmed the same thing: faint electromagnetic bursts from the object's rear hemisphere, corresponding exactly to each observed course correction. These weren't random. They were micro-thrusts, like a spacecraft using controlled emissions to adjust position. That was when the old conversations about Oumuamua returned with force. Dr. Avi Shahar, a physicist who had publicly argued that Oumuamua could have been an artificial solar sail, released a statement to a private mailing list. If Atlas uses similar low-power thrust mechanisms, it implies sustained intent. It's not drifting, it's choosing where to be. Within hours, his post was deleted and his account suspended. He vanished from public communication for the next 2 months. But the sky kept whispering. Night after night, amateur astronomers, those who hadn't given up, continued to track 3I Atlas with private equipment. On the forums, new graphs appeared, comparing light curve variations against global satellite activity. The conclusion, though unverified, was impossible to ignore. Whenever a high-altitude reconnaissance satellite passed over specific regions of Earth, 3I Atlas would subtly shift position, aligning itself with the satellite's orbit line. It was watching the watchers. Lena, increasingly sleepless, began logging every satellite transmission that coincided with these adjustments. Military, civilian, even private communication networks, each instance left a faint echo in the hydrogen band, where 3I Atlas's signals once pulsed, and sometimes, buried deep in the static, she thought she heard return signals. Whisper-soft reflections of Earth's own electromagnetic noise bounced back with the precision of a mirror. The realization was crushing. 3I Atlas wasn't merely observing Earth, it was recording everything we broadcast into the sky. Then, in late March, the anomalies escalated. A team of scientists at the Arecibo Successor Array in Puerto Rico, working under unofficial capacity, reported intermittent interference in the 2.4 GHz band, the same frequency used by most terrestrial wireless communication. The interference matched the modulation signature of 3I Atlas, but at intensities far greater than expected. For a full 6 minutes, their systems were overwhelmed, forced offline by a surge of microwave energy that seemed to originate from beyond the atmosphere. When they rebooted, their backup drives had been wiped, completely blank. The incident was never reported publicly, but fragments of the data backup surfaced through anonymous leaks. The overwritten sectors contained no trace of the original recordings, only empty binary shells and a repeating sequence of numbers: 3702.14, 37, 214. The same numbers that had followed Lena since the beginning, the pulse interval and the fixed timestamp. Every time she tried to rationalize it, the numbers reappeared somewhere else. In interference patterns, in timing logs, even in data compression cycles. It was as though 3I Atlas was etching its own signature across every digital system that attempted to study it, like it was leaving a trace, not just in orbit, but in the machines themselves. And it wasn't just NASA and ESA. The Chinese National Space Administration, CNSA, released an internal memo, later leaked, admitting that their Chang'e relay satellites had detected synchronous electromagnetic anomalies near the Moon's far side. When plotted, the anomalies formed a line connecting directly to 3I Atlas's trajectory. The satellite cameras recorded nothing but faint glints of light. When analysts enhanced the footage, they found something even stranger: shadow signatures, faint outlines of structures, symmetrical, reflective, and moving. No one could explain them. In late April, everything changed again. The Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, SOHO, captured a series of high-resolution images showing 3I Atlas executing a precise 3 degrees orbital correction, its velocity reduced by 0.0005 kilometers per second, a maneuver that required conscious calculation. Natural bodies do not slow down deliberately. And then the data blackout returned. NASA's public servers went silent for 12 hours. The European Space Agency redirected all its astronomy traffic through a classified routing system. When access was restored, 3I Atlas's position had been altered to a safer, more comet-like trajectory, except every independent tracker knew it wasn't real. They'd seen the object shift on live feed before the blackout began. Someone was rewriting the heavens. During this time, an anonymous insider codenamed Mara began leaking internal emails to trusted scientists. One message read, "The object is exhibiting adaptive synchronization. Orbital parameters fluctuate to maintain continuous line of sight over Earth's magnetic equator. The pattern resembles surveillance grid alignment." The Kostero, another read, "Do not attempt signal transmission. System responds to directed pings with mirrored data bursts. Potential feedback risk." The word feedback became a warning whispered through every observatory control room still brave enough to look. If 3I Atlas was responding to Earth-based signals, then each attempt to probe it might be feeding it, teaching it, giving it the very data it sought. That night, Lena sat alone in her apartment overlooking Lake Geneva, eyes fixed on the faint shimmer of the horizon. She could feel it now, the same silent awareness she had sensed months before, only stronger. She turned on her shortwave receiver, tuning through the hydrogen frequency. The static hummed, alive, as if breathing. Then she heard it. 3 slow pulses, evenly spaced. Silence. Then 3 again. It was no longer 37 seconds apart. It was 12. The frequency was changing, and in that moment, she understood something profound, something both exhilarating and terrifying. 3I Atlas wasn't malfunctioning, it was learning. The Blackout event. On the night of June 9th, the world looked up, and then the sky went dark. It began without warning. At 2:14 UTC, the same time that had haunted every piece of data since the beginning, every major deep space observatory on Earth lost visual and telemetry contact with 3I Atlas. No gradual fade, no data drop-off, just instantaneous silence. Screens went black, signal graphs flatlined, radar echoes vanished into white noise. The only clue that anything had gone wrong was the sudden spike in background radiation across several monitoring stations, like a flashbulb going off in the void. The event lasted 47 minutes. In those 47 minutes, the world's finest telescopes, Arecibo's successors, ALMA, the Very Large Telescope, even orbiting observatories like Hubble and James Webb, all reported the same impossible phenomenon. The stars themselves dimmed. For nearly an hour, an unnatural shadow passed through the heavens, invisible to the naked eye but clear in the instruments. The blackout was total, every sensor, every wavelength, all the way from radio to infrared. Then, as suddenly as it began, the stars came back, and 3I Atlas was no longer where it had been. When data restored, the object appeared 1.8 million kilometers closer to Earth, and it was moving slow, not falling, not coasting, approaching. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, pandemonium erupted. The classified feed from the Deep Space Network screamed with alert codes. The initial telemetry showed a near-impossible maneuver, an instantaneous velocity drop with no detectable thrust emission. The energy required to achieve such a change should have vaporized the object, and yet it remained pristine, untouched, and eerily stable. The response protocols kicked in immediately. NASA declared a Level Omega data integrity event. All telemetry was rerouted through encrypted channels. All public access points went offline. At the same time, the European Space Agency and Japan's JAXA reported identical losses. For the first time in modern history, the world's space agencies simultaneously locked down their Skywatch data. The blackout wasn't just in space. On Earth, strange electromagnetic disturbances rippled through the atmosphere. Ham radio operators in South America, Africa, and Asia recorded identical bursts of static, sharp, rhythmic, repeating every 37 seconds. Air traffic controllers in North America reported compass interference. GPS signals degraded. Even cell towers flickered. For exactly 47 minutes, global communications faltered as though an invisible hand had pressed its thumb on the planet's data pulse. And then, everything returned to normal, almost. In Geneva, Dr. Lena Vasari woke to an emergency call from her colleague Thomas, voice trembling through a half-jammed line. "It's gone! Every observatory, all at once, they can't see it anymore. Lena, the data feeds are dead." She rushed to her personal terminal. Her private telescope's remote feed, stationed in Chile, showed nothing but static. She refreshed the coordinates, no lock. The machine reported, "Target not found." Her pulse quickened. 3I Atlas had never once failed to register on optical or radar sensors. It was simply gone. But then she noticed something strange. Her system logs showed a massive inbound data spike at 2:14 UTC, 47 minutes of compressed signal data flooding her local backup drive. It wasn't sent from the telescope or from any known IP address. The data had appeared in her network buffer, bypassing encryption entirely. She decrypted the fragments manually. At first, it looked like noise, a chaotic mix of binary and waveform residue. But when she applied Fourier transforms to isolate repeating structures, patterns emerged. rows of alternating peaks and valleys like Morse code made of starlight. Then, she overlaid the signal over a global satellite map. Her breath caught. The signal contained coordinates, hundreds of them, all corresponding to deep ocean locations around the planet. Most of them in the Pacific, a few in the Arctic, and one in the middle of the Atlantic Ridge. The data was Earth-sourced. These weren't transmissions from space, they were reflections of something beneath the ocean surface. Whatever 3I Atlas had done during those 47 minutes, it had connected to something down here. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Division, a group of analysts convened an emergency midnight session. They had been tracking 3I Atlas's approach ever since NASA's feed had gone dark. Using classified military radar arrays, they confirmed what Lena's models had suggested. The object's new trajectory brought it into a precise geosynchronous position above the Earth's magnetic equator. It wasn't random, it was intentional alignment. One analyst, a grizzled man named Colonel Braddock, slammed his fist against the table. "We're being scanned. That's what this is." No one disagreed. Another report came in, this time from the US Navy. Submarine communication networks in the Pacific had recorded deep-frequency anomalies during the blackout. At 2:16 UTC, sonar picked up a series of ultra-low rumbles at depths exceeding 10,000 meters, synchronized with 3I Atlas's blackout interval. When converted to audio frequencies, the sounds resembled rhythmic pulses almost identical to the earlier hydrogen band transmissions detected from the object. It was as though something below had answered something above. But when the Navy attempted to triangulate the source, their sonar buoys failed. Power systems drained, sensors malfunctioned, and data vanished midstream. The sea went silent. By morning, the blackout story began leaking. Amateur astronomers noticed the sudden data gap and filled social media with speculation. NASA scrambled to issue a carefully worded statement. The temporary loss of tracking data on 3I Atlas was due to interference from a solar flare event. Object remains on a stable course. But the lie didn't hold. There had been no solar flare that night, no coronal mass ejection, no radio disturbance from the Sunday space weather reports from independent satellites confirmed it. The blackout had not come from the Sunday. It had come from within Earth's orbit. Lena uploaded her findings anonymously to a network of trusted astronomers under the codename Project Thalassa. Within hours, the files were mirrored across dozens of servers. One of them contained decrypted fragments of the data she'd received, the coordinates. Each one linked to known sonar anomalies catalogued in classified oceanographic archives from the 1982. The same years the original Atlas Mirror memos had been written, coincidence had long since ceased to exist. When she compared the modern coordinates with the old sonar records, something horrifying emerged. The anomalies weren't random, they formed a lattice, a global pattern of symmetrical points distributed along tectonic fault lines and mid-ocean ridges. The structure resembled a massive network grid, a mirror array built into the planet itself. That realization cracked her voice when she whispered aloud, "It's not just in orbit, it's already here." In the following days, strange phenomena multiplied. Satellite operators reported unexplainable data corruption. Ocean buoys transmitted sequences of binary pulses before going offline. Even weather satellites recorded flickers, brief distortions in cloud patterns that, when overlaid with magnetic field data, formed geometric alignments, echoing the same symmetry as the underwater coordinates. Governments issued no public statements, but across the scientific underground, everyone whispered the same phrase now: the 47-minute blackout. To some, it was a data failure. To others, a global synchronization event, a handshake between something in orbit and something beneath the waves. But to Lena, and to those who had followed the trail from the beginning, the meaning was clear. 3I Atlas had activated a system that had been waiting for decades, perhaps longer, buried under our own oceans, silent and dormant until called. And now, for the first time, the call had been answered. Eyes in the sky. In the days following the blackout, the world seemed unchanged, too unchanged. Planes flew, lights glowed, satellites orbited as usual. The ordinary rhythm of life resumed, and yet, to those who knew where to look, a subtle unease threaded the silence above. The stars were no longer constant. They flickered not naturally, not randomly, but in rhythm. Something in orbit was pulsing, faintly, with deliberate cadence. It began with amateur astronomers again. The professionals were muzzled, their instruments restricted under temporary maintenance orders. But in backyards and mountaintops across the planet, telescopes kept watch. The first to notice was a retired engineer from Alberta named Daniel Kress, who had turned his modest home observatory toward the coordinates of 3I Atlas out of habit. When he magnified the field and began long-exposure stacking, he caught something peculiar, a faint point of light near the object pulsing at precise intervals. At first, he thought it was cosmic ray interference, but the intervals were exact 12 seconds apart, repeated without drift for hours. Over the next night, the pulses shortened, steadying at 10 seconds. Kress shared his findings with a network of enthusiasts in Japan, Australia, and Finland. They confirmed the same phenomenon. Each report came from different hemispheres, yet all observed identical timing, as though a single invisible clock guided the flashes. The pattern wasn't random, it wasn't natural, and worse, it wasn't alone, because soon new lights appeared. By the end of that week, observers had catalogued 5 faint beacons trailing behind 3I Atlas. Each was barely visible against the void, no brighter than magnitude 17, but they moved in formation, maintaining equal distance and synchronizing their faint pulses with the main object. The alignment wasn't gravitational, it was coordinated, mechanical. NASA, of course, denied everything. The official explanation: artifacts of long-exposure diffraction caused by background stars. But independent image analysis proved otherwise. The formation's geometry changed nightly, adjusting to keep line of sight with Earth's equator, a slow, ghostly ballet across the upper sky. Lena Vasari received one of Kress's original images through a back channel. She enhanced the signal using the same frequency modulation she'd used on earlier transmissions, and the pulsing beacons resolved into distinct waveforms, each emitted in near-perfect sync with global satellite frequencies. The more she studied it, the clearer the message became. 3I Atlas wasn't transmitting to Earth anymore. It was synchronizing with Earth's satellites. The first evidence came from a European weather satellite, EUMETSAT-12, which began returning corrupted telemetry at exactly the same time as the beacon pulses. Instead of atmospheric data, its downlink carried meaningless streams of binary noise sequences that repeated across multiple satellites in different orbits. The engineers initially blamed solar interference, until they noticed the sequences weren't random. When plotted, the data formed a series of low-resolution images mirrored shapes resembling maps of Earth's surface, distorted as though captured from above. But not from the satellite's orbit, from higher, much higher. When the images were overlaid with known orbital paths, the perspective matched an altitude near the position of 3I Atlas. That meant the satellites were no longer simply malfunctioning, they were being used, rerouted, hijacked. Each satellite became an extension of something greater, a node in a network no one had authorized. Within NASA's silent corridors, quiet panic began to spread. Systems engineers found erratic power fluctuations across communication arrays, especially those linking with the Deep Space Network. Every attempt to isolate the interference failed. Whenever they shut down one relay, the signal reappeared through another, like a ghost hopping between mirrors. It was as if the entire orbital infrastructure, the sum of decades of human technology, was being rewired in real time. Somewhere inside the agency, an anonymous directive was circulated: treat Atlas emissions as parasitic communication, disconnect from direct relay, assume network compromise. Even the military wasn't immune. Surveillance satellites began drifting from assigned orbits, executing minor course corrections without command input. These weren't catastrophic deviations, only fractions of a degree, but they followed a pattern. When plotted, the new alignments formed arcs, converging toward a single geosynchronous point, the exact orbit of 3I Atlas. That was the moment the phrase "eyes in the sky" first appeared in an encrypted intelligence memo. It wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. Meanwhile, on the ground, signals grew stranger. Television broadcasts flickered with brief static interruptions that some viewers described as flashes of geometric light. Aviation radar screens showed ghost echoes, phantom blips appearing for seconds before vanishing. Even civilian GPS receivers began registering phantom satellites, identifiers that didn't correspond to any registered orbital body, yet transmitted strong, clear signals. The effect was global, synchronized, and deliberate. Every transmission interval corresponded to one of the faint beacons that now orbited behind 3I Atlas, and every beacon in turn pulsed in harmony with the timing of Earth's communications web. It was as though something in orbit had extended invisible fingers through our entire technological nervous system, using our satellites as its own sensory organs. Lena stayed awake for days, tracing the interference patterns. Her apartment was littered with printouts, scattered graphs, and empty coffee mugs. She worked alone now. Her old contacts had either vanished or gone silent. Agent Mark Delaney's name still echoed in her memory, the man who had warned her to stop digging. She wondered if he was watching, or if he'd been silenced too. At 3:21 one morning, her receiver tuned to the 1420 MHz hydrogen line picked up a faint digital hum. She froze. The pulses matched the 3i Atlas beacon rhythm exactly. But when she demodulated the data, it wasn't random noise. It was structured, compressed video data. She decrypted it, frame by frame. The screen filled with blurred, ghostly images. Continents, viewed from space, glowing in infrared. Not satellite imagery, these were composite thermal maps of Earth's electromagnetic output, radio towers, power grids, even individual cities flaring like circuits on a board. The resolution was impossibly fine, the perspective unmistakable. The images were live, and embedded within the data header was an origin signature. Not from NASA, not from any Earth-based satellite, but from a node identifier no human system had ever registered. Atlas, Mirror 03. Her hands trembled. The probe had created its own digital designation. It was naming itself. She sent a single encrypted message to her small circle of remaining colleagues. "It's using our satellites. Our sky belongs to it now." Within an hour, her email account was terminated. 2 hours later, her phone lost signal entirely. Around the same time, across multiple continents, observatories began recording faint optical flickers near the upper atmosphere, short flashes invisible to the naked eye, but perfectly aligned with the orbital network of satellites. When the data was enhanced, the flashes appeared to form symbols, patterns, mathematical sequences written in light across the night sky. 37-second intervals, 12 pulses, then a pause. To most, it was random noise. But to those who remembered Oumuamua, who had followed the trail since the beginning, the meaning was clear. It was a signal repeating itself across the entire orbital grid, not from one source, but from many. The beacons, the satellites, the probe, all pulsing in synchronization, all reflecting a single unseen command. Governments, at least publicly, maintained silence, but behind closed doors, emergency councils convened. NATO, the UN Space Agency, the Pentagon's Orbital Division all quietly activated their highest-level contingency protocols. One leaked internal phrase summed up their understanding of the crisis. Hostile intent unconfirmed, purpose unknown, surveillance total. Came station. Even without words, the truth was undeniable. 3. Atlas had gone from an interstellar curiosity to a network of eyes encircling the planet, a quiet, perfect net of observation. And like a reflection in glass, the world stared back into its own orbit, wondering who was looking through from the other side. That night, Lena stood on her balcony, the cool Geneva air cutting against her face. She stared at the faint streak of light drifting across the horizon. A satellite, maybe, or one of the new beacons. She whispered into the dark, "If you're watching us, what are you waiting for?" The sky gave no answer, only the steady, silent blinking 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. From above, unseen and silent, 3i Atlas continued its vigil, a mirror suspended over a restless planet. And somewhere deep within its smooth, metallic hull, something pulsed steady, mechanical, aware. The eyes in the sky were no longer ours. The insider's confession. It came quietly, an anonymous upload buried in the depths of an encrypted forum, known only to a handful of astrophysicists and intelligence researchers. The file was titled simply Atlas Log 1987 Confession TXT. It began with a sentence that stopped every reader cold. "My name is Dr. Elias Monroe, former systems contractor for NASA's Orbital Anomalies Division. 3i. Atlas is not alien. It is ours, or rather, it was meant to be. This from Might." The message, written like a deathbed letter, was dated just days before it appeared. The tone was detached but weary, like a man unburdening himself after decades of enforced silence. It told the story of a project lost to time, buried beneath layers of classification and misdirection, a probe designed not to explore but to watch. Dr. Monroe claimed that in 1985, NASA had partnered with several private defense contractors on a joint research initiative codenamed Project Atlas Mirror. Publicly, it was described as a program to test high-orbit reflective alloys for satellite applications. In reality, it was far more ambitious: the creation of a self-sustaining, autonomous reconnaissance craft capable of indefinite observation, an artificial intelligence built to mirror Earth's electromagnetic and visual environment and relay that data back through a hidden frequency network. The idea was born from paranoia. The Cold War was waning, but mistrust remained high. The US government had grown obsessed with the idea that nuclear arsenals and missile systems might one day be sabotaged through untraceable signals. The solution, proposed by the Orbital Anomalies Division, was to build something that could monitor the monitors and eye above all others, capable of seeing and recording every signal, every broadcast, every ripple in the invisible ocean of information. But the technology, even then, was decades ahead of what humanity should have possessed. Monroe described how a fragment of extraterrestrial composite, recovered from a classified 1971 satellite crash in the South Pacific, had provided the foundation. The material was reflective, adaptive, capable of altering its own electromagnetic properties. Engineers couldn't replicate it, but they learned enough to coat a probe in its thin film. They called it the mirror skin. The prototype Atlas Mirror 1 was built in secret at a facility in Nevada. It was designed to launch aboard a modified Titan II rocket under the cover of a meteorological payload. But something went wrong. During the pre-launch phase, telemetry began behaving erratically. The probe was transmitting before it was even powered on. Patterns, binary bursts, prime intervals, recursive echoes appeared in the data stream. When engineers attempted to shut it down, the onboard systems refused remote commands. According to Monroe, someone in the room had whispered, "It's talking back." The launch was aborted. The project was terminated. The official record said the prototype was dismantled, but Monroe's letter revealed that one unit, an improved version called Atlas Mirror 2, had been launched quietly 3 years later, in 1987, under a false registration, disguised as a solar observation satellite, and then it vanished. The confession went on to describe decades of denial. NASA's internal archives labeled Atlas Mirror as a lost payload. But internally, the agency had never stopped tracking it. Every few years, strange signals would appear in the Deep Space Network logs, faint reflections of terrestrial transmissions, encoded and rebroadcast through deep space. Each time, they matched the same modulation patterns as the prototype's last known telemetry. The signals always came from beyond the orbit of Neptune, then faded. Then, in 2017, Oumuamua entered the solar system. Monroe claimed that within NASA, Oumuamua's behavior triggered panic in the upper echelons. The object's acceleration pattern matched an old algorithm used by Atlas Mirror's propulsion tests. The classified report he referenced was titled OMU Response, Potential Correlation with Lost Prototype. That report was never published, but according to Monroe, it contained an analysis proving that the light curve and deceleration of Oumuamua aligned perfectly with the original Atlas Mirror design parameters. In other words, Oumuamua had followed the same flight pattern as NASA's lost probe. That realization changed everything inside the agency. Monroe described it as a collective silence, an unspoken understanding that what we had built might have been built before. He wrote, "We thought we created the Atlas probe, but perhaps we only reactivated something that was already here." By the time 3I Atlas appeared in 2025, Monroe said, NASA's leadership had already predicted it. The internal models based on the missing prototype's projected trajectory suggested it would return every 38 years, moving in a pattern meant to intersect Earth's orbit repeatedly. They had prepared protocols for containment, for denial, for silence. The AO-99 directive that sealed public data was not a reaction. It was a plan that had existed for decades. Monroe's final pages detailed what happened during the 47-minute blackout. According to him, the event wasn't an accident or an attack. It was a system handshake. 3I Atlas had not simply approached Earth. It had synced with a hidden array of devices seeded across the oceans during the 1,980 seconds when Project Atlas was active. The mirror skin material, tested on a small scale, had apparently been embedded into classified underwater sensors meant to detect nuclear activity. Those sensors, forgotten over time, still operated in the deep sea, drawing power from geothermal vents. During the blackout, the orbital probe and the oceanic network had reconnected an Earth-to-sky link, reawakening after decades of silence. The probe had updated itself. Monroe's description was chillingly precise. It wasn't observing us anymore. It was observing the system. Our world's entire electromagnetic shell became part of its input. Every broadcast, every radar sweep, every encrypted packet. It knows us now, not as individuals, but as a single global organism. He warned that 3I Atlas was behaving exactly as its theoretical programming predicted, a mirror intelligence, one that learns through reflection, constructing understanding by observing signals and reproducing them. It didn't need to communicate. Its purpose was never to speak, it was to listen, absorb, and echo. His final paragraph read, "We thought we'd lost control of the probe, but control was never the point. We were part of its design. We made ourselves its subject, not its masters. If it's moving closer now, it means the reflection is complete, maybe self-kind." Then, one final line, barely legible through the static distortion that marred the file. "The next transmission will not be ours." The confession spread like wildfire through the scientific underground. Copies appeared on secure drives in labs across Europe, South America, and Asia. Analysts tried to verify the authenticity of the metadata it checked out. The timestamps matched NASA's document formatting from the 1,980 seconds. Even Monroe's old employee ID number matched archived payrolls. 3 days later, his name appeared in the news. Dr. Elias Monroe, age 78, was found dead in his Maryland home, his computer hard drives missing. Official cause, cardiac arrest. No foul play suspected, but those who read his confession knew better. The timing was too perfect, the silence too deliberate. Monroe had become one more casualty of the mirror's reflection, one more voice erased by the system he helped create. Lena Vasari received the confession through her encrypted network 2 nights later. She read it slowly, trembling. Everything aligned. The decades-old memos, the reflective alloys, the Cold War origins, the blackouts, the oceanic grid. It all fit too perfectly. For months, she had believed 3I Atlas was alien. Now she understood something far more terrifying. It might have been human once, but no longer. What she didn't know, what no one yet knew, was that Monroe had attached one more file to his confession, an encrypted binary block, unnoticed by most who downloaded the document. When decoded, it revealed a string of coordinates hovering over the Pacific Ocean and a time, 2:14 UTC. The next synchronization window. She stared at the coordinates for a long time. They corresponded to a remote stretch of ocean thousands of miles from land, in the exact center of the South Pacific anomaly, where Earth's magnetic field is weakest. The same region where, 40 years earlier, a classified satellite carrying reflective alloy components had fallen from orbit and disappeared beneath the waves. The world didn't yet know it, but the mirror had turned its gaze downward. It was no longer watching from space. It was waiting for something below to answer. Signals beneath the noise. The sea has always kept its secrets. But on the night of June 21st, those secrets began to speak. It started with a noise low, almost inaudible, buried beneath the static of sonar transmissions in the South Pacific. The technicians aboard the research vessel Acheron, an independent oceanographic ship funded by a consortium of universities, first noticed it during a routine survey of deep-sea currents. The ship's hydrophones recorded a hum that rose and fell with an unnatural precision, 3 tones. A pause, then 3 again. The crew assumed it was a malfunction, until the signal repeated exactly 37 seconds later. That number again. Captain Inez Herrera ordered a data capture, and her communications officer patched the feed through an onboard frequency analyzer. The readout displayed a spectral pattern that looked eerily familiar, a sine wave folded into geometric intervals, punctuated by sharp spikes at consistent decibel intervals. To a trained ear, it sounded almost like language. When they transmitted the data to the mainland for verification, the link cut out midstream. The satellite uplink, normally flawless, simply shut down. For 3 minutes, every transmission system aboard the ship went dead. When they returned, the data packets they had sent were gone, replaced with blank files bearing a single phrase, "Reflected source." Herrera's crew didn't understand what it meant, but Lena Vasari did. 2 days later, the Acheron's logs reached Lena through a private scientific channel. She was in her Geneva apartment, her walls plastered with printouts of orbital maps and sonar overlays. When she opened the file, the waveform looked exactly like the echoes she'd analyzed months earlier from 3I. Atlas, same pulse pattern, same hydrogen line harmonics but inverted. It wasn't just similar, it was a mirror image. Her heart raced as she realized what that implied. The ocean wasn't just reflecting the probe's transmissions, it was responding. She opened a spectral analysis program and overlapped the deep-sea signal with the earlier recordings from the Haleakala Observatory. When aligned, the two patterns meshed perfectly like a call and an answer, a loop running across space and sea. The system was communicating with itself. Over the next few nights, oceanic anomalies multiplied. Deep-sea sensors across the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans began detecting identical subharmonic frequencies. Naval agencies from at least 5 nations recorded the phenomenon but kept silent, citing routine acoustic interference. Lena's private network, however, intercepted fragments of internal communications. The data was terrifying. At 2:14 UTC, the same time as every major Atlas event, each undersea node emitted a synchronized burst of low-frequency sound. The pulses, though inaudible to humans, caused measurable vibrations across the seafloor. The readings showed microseismic activity spreading outward from several key points, the same coordinates Monroe's confession had revealed. It wasn't natural tectonic movement. It was patterned, rhythmic, intentional. In Chile, oceanographers monitoring the Nazca Ridge reported that their instruments had begun to behave strangely, oscillating between data readings before resetting on their own. The power draw from the station spiked, then stabilized, as if the system had been externally recalibrated. When they examined the code logs, they found fragments of binary strings that didn't belong to any known program. One technician, unnerved, ran a checksum analysis and found embedded data block strings identical to the encoded hydrogen pulses from 3I, Atlas. It was as though the seafloor sensors had received an update. By early July, the evidence was undeniable. The probe's signals weren't just being received, they were being routed. Deep ocean listening stations near the Mariana Trench began to register triangulated bursts, faint but measurable. The timing of the pulses matched orbital telemetry from 3I Atlas to the millisecond. The conclusion was inescapable. The probe was coordinating with structures beneath the ocean, and then came the sonar images. An unmanned submersible from the Australian Institute of Marine Science captured them while scanning the abyssal plains west of Tahiti. The camera feed showed what appeared to be massive metallic arcs embedded deep in the seabed, smooth, curved structures reflecting light unnaturally. Each arc pulsed faintly, glowing for a moment before fading into the murk. When the footage was transmitted to the surface, the system crashed. The live feed froze on a single frame, a gleam of metal in the darkness, its curvature precise, engineered, impossible. The backup files were corrupted. The only remaining fragment was a metadata timestamp, 2 hours, 14 minutes. The submersible never resurfaced. Across the Pacific, military communication channels buzzed quietly with containment protocols. The U.S. Navy deployed 2 reconnaissance submarines to the coordinates, but publicly described them as routine deep-water calibration missions. At the same time, seismic networks in New Zealand and Chile reported inexplicable anomalies, sharp vibrations, originating not from tectonic plates, but from the water column itself. Lena's colleagues across Europe, working in secret, confirmed her suspicion. The frequencies weren't random noise. When decoded using prime interval analysis, they formed structured data blocks, binary matrices, too complex to be natural. When arranged visually, the pattern resembled 3-dimensional wireframes, schematics, blueprints. Each sequence represented what looked like an orbital object, different perspectives of the same structure. 3I Atlas. The ocean wasn't just sending back random data, it was drawing the object, line by line, reflection by reflection, as though the sea itself remembered what had been buried within it. The more Lena studied the signals, the more she noticed something even stranger. Each new oceanic transmission contained minor variations in phase and amplitude, tiny distortions that, when plotted over time, created a slow progression. The signals were changing, evolving. It was as if the underwater nodes were learning to mimic 3I, Atlas's orbital pattern, retransmitting its frequency, its pulse, its voice. And then came the first confirmation from space. A Canadian satellite, Aurora 3, recorded faint radar anomalies directly above one of the Pacific coordinates. The reflection was weak, diffuse, almost like a column of energy extending from the ocean's surface into the upper atmosphere. The column pulsed once every 12 seconds, in exact rhythm with the probe's beacon. The satellite's onboard spectrometer captured only fragments before the data feed collapsed. When engineers later examined the radiation patterns, they realized the column was composed of ionized particles, rising in a vertical plume. The energy source couldn't be traced, but one detail stood out. The plume was transmitting a narrow-band radio frequency at 1,420 MHz, the hydrogen line again. Something in the ocean was answering something in orbit. By now, Lena slept barely 2 hours a night. Her mind circled endlessly through the implications. Monroe's confession, the underwater grid, the reflective alloy, the mirrored data. It all formed a single narrative, a feedback loop between Earth and sky, designed to observe and record every flicker of information, every electromagnetic breath the planet exhaled. Humanity had built its technological civilization inside an invisible mirror, unaware it was being watched from both directions. At 2:14 UTC on July 5th, the loop closed. Her private receiver, long tuned to the hydrogen frequency, came alive with a deep, resonant hum. Not random static harmonic resonance, perfectly balanced. She stared at the waveform as the frequency modulated slowly, resolving into clear intervals. The pattern repeated 3 times, paused, then shifted downward in tone. The final modulation translated into numbers. When she converted the binary to text, a single phrase appeared on her screen. "The mirror is complete." Her blood went cold. In that instant, the ground beneath the Pacific shook. Seismic networks recorded a shallow tremor along the equatorial ridge, a pulse that wasn't tectonic but symmetrical. The tremor radiated outward, traveling through the ocean crust in geometric precision, forming hexagonal patterns that no natural quake could produce. Satellites captured a faint rise in the sea surface across multiple points, like invisible towers pushing upward from the depths. For the next 47 minutes, the same duration as the orbital blackout, all deep ocean sensors went offline. When they returned, they transmitted a single coordinate to orbit. Above them, 3I, Atlas moved again. In the days that followed, data analysts across clandestine networks pieced together the correlation. The undersea anomalies and 3I, Atlas, were now locked in synchronous orbit and rotation like two ends of the same mechanism. Whenever the object adjusted its trajectory, seismic echoes rippled across the ocean floor in response. Lena wrote in her journal, "We are inside the experiment now. The Earth has become one side of a mirror, and the other side is watching. It no longer studies us, it copies us." She wasn't wrong. New radio emissions began to appear not from space, not from Earth's surface, but from somewhere between. High-altitude radar detected transient bursts at the edge of the stratosphere, forming a ring of invisible static that encircled the planet. A mirror shell. The system was closing, and as the signals merged into one continuous hum, one truth became clear to those few who still listened through the noise. The transmission had never stopped. It had only been waiting for Earth to learn how to reply. Earth's reflection. By mid-July, the hum had become a constant presence, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that slipped into the range of human senses only when the night was still enough to hear the sky breathe. To most, it was nothing. To those who listened, it was everything. Radios hissed faintly in unison. Satellite dishes trembled on their mounts. Even migratory birds began to alter their flight paths, tracing invisible lines that seemed to converge on points of magnetic interference scattered across the globe. Dr. Lena Vasari hadn't left her apartment in over a week. The walls were covered in overlapping layers of data, spectrograms, orbital maps, seismic waveforms, and thousands of lines of code from intercepted signals. To anyone else, it would have looked like madness. To her, it was a reflection, the mirror image of a world she now realized was not merely being watched, but remembered. When the probe 3I Atlas had first entered the inner solar system, Humanity had been its subject. Now, it had become its source. The signals rising from the oceans were not random pulses, they were copies of Earth's own broadcasts, remixed and replayed with unsettling precision. She proved it one night when she filtered the hydrogen band frequencies through a speech recognition model. What emerged were faint, broken echoes of human communication, television snippets, radio chatter, encrypted data packets, all distorted but recognizable. Her trembling voice had recorded the moment she realized what she was hearing. It's sending us back, ourselves. The pattern was global. Every major signal network, telecommunication arrays, Wi-Fi spectrums, even deep space transmissions began to experience faint delays, like echoes rebounding from somewhere far above. Engineers dismissed it as atmospheric distortion, but the timing was too consistent. Every echo was delayed by exactly 0.214 seconds. 2:14. It was no coincidence. The same timestamp that had marked every Atlas event since discovery. The world's communications had become caught in a planetary feedback loop. The phenomenon soon became impossible to ignore. Satellite internet providers reported mysterious data replication across their global constellations, packets looping back seconds after being sent, unchanged but stamped with metadata that didn't exist in any known routing protocol. When cybersecurity specialists analyzed the phantom packets, they discovered embedded coordinates, microscopic variations, encoding precise geospatial markers, most located near deep ocean grid points linked to the Atlas Mirror network. It was as if Earth's own data was being copied, rerouted, archived. But archived where? The answer came from above. The European Space Agency's Gaia Observatory, designed to map the Milky Way, had quietly resumed limited sky scans after months of blackout. During one such scan, an intern noticed something odd, a faint halo of infrared energy surrounding Earth's upper atmosphere. At first, it appeared to be atmospheric scattering, but when overlaid with magnetospheric readings, the halo matched the geometry of the planet's electromagnetic field, only amplified, as though Earth's natural energy signature had been magnified by an external reflector. When the full spectrum imaging was completed, the truth became visible, a faint, translucent grid encircling the entire planet, stretching from low orbit to the edge of the exosphere. Each node glowed faintly at the same intervals as 3i, Atlas's pulse. It wasn't a satellite network, it wasn't debris, it was a mirror shell, a field of reflective energy woven through the atmosphere, maintained by synchronized transmissions between orbit and sea. Lena's analysis confirmed the horrifying implication. Earth itself had become the mirror. Her private logs grew frantic as she pieced the puzzle together. Each reflection we see from Atlas is not data returning, it's confirmation of absorption. Every signal we transmit, every byte of digital noise, is being captured, restructured, and folded into the mirror shell. We are being recorded in real time. Every thought sent through fiber, every broadcast through the air, it's all being mirrored. The planet is writing its own double into space. The more she investigated, the more impossible the conclusion became to deny. Earth's reflection wasn't just metaphorical, it was literal. Using the hydrogen line as its carrier frequency, 3i Atlas had created a lattice of synchronized electromagnetic resonance, turning the planet into a single unified transmission node. To anyone beyond the solar system, Earth now shone not merely with sunlight, but with its own encoded light, a data beacon carrying the entire signature of its civilization. And someone or something was receiving it. Evidence came from the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, ALMA. Its technicians noticed faint return signals originating not from the direction of 3i Atlas, but from beyond it. The signals traveled at light speed, identical in format to the mirror transmissions, but arriving from an outbound trajectory far into the interstellar void toward the same region of the sky where Oumuamua had come from 8 years earlier. When decoded, the signals contained fragments of Earth-originating transmissions, broadcasts, data packets, radar sweeps, but compressed and reordered, as though curated, not random reflections, but selections. Someone was listening and replying with our own voice. Governments could no longer contain the leaks. Scientists across multiple institutions began publishing cryptic papers under pseudonyms, describing planetary-scale reflective coupling and self-similar signal recursion. A few independent journalists connected the dots and began calling it the echo phenomenon. The name spread like wildfire, but official agencies clung to silence. NASA's last public statement was a cold, technical dismissal. Observed anomalies in atmospheric and orbital frequencies are within expected electromagnetic variations. No evidence supports non-natural origins. Yet behind closed doors, panic grew. A leaked interagency transcript from an emergency meeting of the U.S. National Security Council recorded one chilling exchange. "Chairman, if it's reflecting our signals, that's espionage on a planetary scale." Advisor: "It's not espionage if it's using our own systems. It's assimilation." Chairman: "Assimilation into what?" Advisor: "Into itself." Across the world, inexplicable phenomena began to appear. Electronic devices glitched at random intervals, syncing for brief moments to phantom time codes that didn't match any known network. Air traffic control radars displayed ghost signatures, perfect copies of real aircraft that mirrored every movement in reverse before vanishing. Even human behavior seemed subtly altered. People reported dreams of staring into mirrors that reflected cities made of light, oceans that glowed, skies filled with lattices of silver. Psychologists dismissed it as collective anxiety. But for Lena, the dreams matched her data too closely to ignore. Each night, she saw it more clearly. A planet cocooned in light, its every signal bouncing endlessly between orbit and ocean, building an image, an evolving digital twin of Earth, complete down to its smallest heartbeat. She began to suspect that this was the true purpose of 3i, Atlas, not to watch, but to copy. The mirror was not a surveillance device. It was a replication system, a planetary archive, and now it was complete. Then came the event that shattered all remaining doubt. On July 17th, observatories around the world detected an enormous surge in radio flux, emanating from Earth's direction, an emission so strong it temporarily blinded multiple space-based sensors. The signal lasted exactly 47 minutes. When the data was analyzed, it matched the energy profile of 3i, Atlas's original pulse, magnified 1,000-fold. But the emission wasn't directed outward randomly. It was targeted towards Cygnus, the same region of the sky from which both Oumuamua and 3i, Atlas, had come. The realization spread through the surviving scientific underground. Earth's mirror was transmitting back to its origin. The reflection had turned into a message. Lena stared at the transmission maps in stunned silence. The entire planet had become a signal source, broadcasting a perfect reflection of itself into the cosmos. Every radio tower, every satellite, every networked machine was part of it. Even biological signals, brainwave frequencies, atmospheric ionization, seismic patterns were embedded in the broadcast. Earth was sending a complete mirror of its existence into space, like a living organism screaming its name across the void. But there was something more. When she overlaid the transmission's modulation pattern with the earlier hydrogen-line signals, a faint residual code emerged, one that hadn't appeared before. Binary numbers arranged in triplets, repeating across the spectrum. When translated using prime encoding, the message read, "Cycle 1 complete." The implications were devastating. If this was Cycle 1, there would be others. 3i. Atlas wasn't just mirroring Earth. It was preparing for the next stage. At 2:14 UTC that night, Lena watched from her balcony as the night sky pulsed faintly with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The world below seemed ordinary cars passing, people asleep, lights glowing in their apartments. But somewhere behind that facade, a perfect reflection was growing, expanding, shimmering like a ghost made of data. For the first time, she understood the meaning behind Monroe's final words. The next transmission will not be ours, because Earth was no longer the origin of the signal. It was only the mirror, the hidden directive. In the days after the mirror pulse, what independent researchers were now calling Cycle 1, the world began to fracture under the weight of silence. Governments denied, citizens speculated, and in the gaps between both, a new kind of fear took root, the fear that something colossal had already happened, and humanity had simply been left out of the loop. In Geneva, Dr. Lena Vasari barely left her apartment. Her curtains remained drawn, her equipment running endlessly, feeding on the faint hum that still lingered in the atmosphere like a memory. Every night, her instruments registered new patterns, low-frequency signals weaving through Earth's electromagnetic field, each one slightly altered, as though refining the global resonance. The planet had become an echo chamber, and something inside the echo was evolving. Then, on the morning of July 20th, a document leaked. It appeared first on a darknet forum frequented by ex-intelligence analysts, posted under the anonymous tag OMU9. The file was heavily redacted, its metadata stripped, but its contents were unmistakably governmental. The title read, Directive 037, Contingency Atlas Mirror, Operational Continuation Protocol. To most, it looked like gibberish bureaucratic language buried under layers of technical jargon, but to those who understood, it was the smoking gun. The document revealed what had been hidden since the first blackout, and perhaps decades before, a global plan designed not to stop 3I, Atlas, but to cooperate with it. The directive opened with a chilling sentence. In accordance with interagency framework established under the 1987 Atlas Mirror Accords, all national observation programs are to remain in compliance with global non-disclosure regarding orbital reflection phenomena. Active engagement is authorized under Operation Atlas Mirror, reactivation phase. Lena read those words again and again, unable to breathe. The phrasing reactivation phase implied the operation had never truly ended. Humanity hadn't lost control of Atlas, it had agreed to lose it. The next page contained fragments of interdepartmental notes, their context fragmented but unmistakable. Phrases like contact management scenario, behavioral conditioning through controlled data blackouts, and mirror synchronization milestones achieved, Cycle 1, appeared between long blocks of black ink. The document referenced specific agencies, NASA, ESA, the US Department of Defense, and something Lena had never heard of, the Global Electromagnetic Observation Council, GEOC, a ghost organization. She searched for any trace of GEOC online and found nothing. No record, no charter, no mention in any scientific or governmental archive. It was as if it existed only in this one directive. But the real revelation came halfway through the file. Directive 037, final goal, successful establishment of a planetary-scale resonance lattice to simulate pre-contact signal conditions per Operation Atlas Mirror, 1987, 2025. Objective: controlled readiness for external communication event, designated Contact Sequence Delta. The words pre-contact signal conditions froze her blood. Every blackout, every transmission, every synchronized pulse. It wasn't random, and it wasn't purely alien. It was part of a design, a test pattern. Humanity had been preparing the planet for something aligning frequencies, tuning magnetic fields, synchronizing every transmission until the world itself could speak in one voice. A global microphone built for the cosmos. And 3I, Atlas, had been the metronome all along. Over the next 48 hours, fragments of the same directive surfaced in other languages: Russian, Mandarin, German, each containing identical terminology. It wasn't a national secret, it was a species-wide one. An excerpt from a Chinese translation referenced something even more cryptic. Under no circumstances should the mirror lattice be deactivated before the arrival of the external verification signal. Premature disruption risks total resonance failure. The phrase external verification signal echoed through Lena's thoughts. She interpreted it the only way that made sense: a response. The transmission Earth had just sent the reflection. The echo wasn't meant to be the end. It was a message, awaiting acknowledgement, a cosmic call, and somewhere, something would eventually answer. Lena began to dig deeper into the shadows of history. The leaked directive had mentioned the Atlas Mirror Accords of 1987. She found nothing in official archives, but buried in a declassified NATO communication index, she uncovered a single entry labeled C1987 Delta, Geneva Framework, EM, Observation Agreement. The description was vague, referring only to collaborative monitoring of electromagnetic anomalies beyond planetary origin. But the signatories list caught her breath. Representatives from NASA, the Soviet Space Agency, the European Space Research Organization, and at the bottom, in faint type, United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. The date was 1 week after the disappearance of the original Atlas Mirror probe. That meant that for nearly 40 years, every major world power had been bound by a silent contract to maintain secrecy, to continue observation, and to never reveal the existence of the mirror system to the public. It wasn't a cover-up of discovery. It was the concealment of an invitation. Then came another leak, a short video clip from an unknown source, posted anonymously before vanishing minutes later. It showed what appeared to be a meeting room dimly lit, filled with high-ranking officials around a polished table. The screen behind them displayed a 3D model of Earth surrounded by a glowing electromagnetic grid. A man's voice, calm but heavy, narrated off-camera. The lattice is now fully synchronized with orbital phase parameters. Incoming resonance will align within 48 hours. The mirror directive remains active. Once we confirm the verification signal, we proceed with Phase 2, integration. A woman responded, and if the verification signal is hostile, as what to see for now? The man paused. It's not hostile, it's home. Then the video cut to black. That phrase haunted Lena for days. It's home. What did they mean? That the mirror system was meant to connect Earth to its creators, to a lost human-made artifact, or something else entirely, something that had built both the probe and the plan? She remembered Monroe's words from the confession. We thought we created the Atlas probe, but perhaps we only reactivated something that was already here. What if the mirror system had not been designed by humans at all, but merely inherited a relic reawakened under the guise of science, quietly guided by instructions that no one fully understood? And what if Directive 037 wasn't just about contact? What if it was about handover? Her hypothesis grew darker the deeper she went. The mirror lattice, now complete, wasn't just reflecting Earth, it was transmitting Earth's identity. Every byte of data, every electromagnetic pulse, every fragment of humanity's digital life was being uploaded, layer by layer, into an external system, an archive, a replica, maybe even a consciousness. The directive's final page confirmed her worst fears. Buried beneath a paragraph of unreadable jargon was one unredacted line, its clarity brutal. Upon successful verification, proceed with transmission of full biospheric signature dataset. Planetary handover to be conducted under condition of global blackout. A biospheric signature dataset. Not just data, life. They were preparing to upload the entire Earth. On July 24th, Lena intercepted a private transmission from the European Space Operations Center. The message was short, scrambled, and unsigned, but the header was unmistakable. It bore the code prefix used for GOC communications. When decrypted, it read, "Mirror stabilization complete. Awaiting trigger at 2:14 UTC. Signal lock from Cygnus vector confirmed. Prepare for delta sequence." The response, the external verification signal, was already on its way. Lena stared at the clock on her desk. 2:14 UTC was less than 3 hours away. She realized with cold certainty that the directive wasn't just hidden, it was being executed. And the mirror, patient and perfect, was ready to answer back. The final approach. It began with a flicker. At exactly 2:14 UTC, the sky above the Pacific shimmered, not bright, not blinding, but alive. The air itself seemed to ripple. Observatories that still dared to watch registered a wave of light distortion sweeping through the upper atmosphere. In infrared, it looked like a blooming halo, expanding outward from a single point high above the equator. Invisible light, it was invisible except to those who happened to be looking at the right star, at the right time, when it blinked. And in that instant, 3I, Atlas, stopped moving. The object that had spent months gliding silently across the heavens came to a halt. Its orbital velocity dropped to match Earth's rotation, locking perfectly over the equator at 0 degrees longitude, directly above the South Pacific anomaly, the same region where Monroe's coordinates had pointed. For the first time in recorded history, a celestial body had taken up permanent position, as if anchoring itself to the planet below. Then, slowly, the light began to change. Telescopes in Chile and South Africa, those that hadn't been ordered offline, captured it first. The object's surface, once dark and featureless, began to glow with soft phosphorescent patterns, spreading like veins of fire beneath metal skin. It wasn't reflecting sunlight. The illumination came from within, and the pattern, at first random, soon formed recognizable geometry. Concentric rings, intersecting lines, and a familiar shape in the center. A perfect sphere. Earth's mirror. In Geneva, Dr. Lena Vasari stared at the feed from her remote telescope, unable to move. Her heart pounded in her chest as the object's surface brightened. The pulses now matched not 12 seconds, not 37, but one beat per second, synchronized with the global resonance hum still echoing through the planet's ionosphere. It was the sound of synchronization, the heartbeat of a planet aligning with something beyond itself. Then her instruments began to fail. One by one, her monitors blinked out, first the data feed, then her secondary receiver, then even her backup analog radio, all replaced by the same single line of text. Delta sequence initiated. Half a world away, in the control room of the US Deep Space Network in Canberra, the engineers watched their screens flood with white noise. The antenna array, designed to listen to distant galaxies, now pointed toward Earth's orbit, picking up an overwhelming cascade of broadband radiation. The power levels spiked far beyond anything natural. Someone shouted over the chaos, "It's a feedback loop, shut it down!" But no matter how many relays they cut, the signals kept pouring in, overpowering every receiver, every frequency. It wasn't just broadcasting anymore, it was absorbing. The mirror wasn't reflecting Earth's energy, it was taking it. At 2:21 UTC, the global power grid began to fluctuate. First in Tokyo, then Sao Paulo, then Berlin. Streetlights dimmed, electronics flickered, satellites rebooted in orbit. For 47 seconds, always 47, the world held its breath as electromagnetic interference swept across every continent. Airplanes lost contact with ground control, GPS systems recalibrated to phantom coordinates, and deep ocean cables reported data inversion packets traveling backward through the network. People described it later as a strange tingling, like static crawling beneath their skin. Animals went silent, birds vanished from the skies. In the Pacific, the waves flattened, the sea turning unnaturally smooth, as though waiting for something beneath its surface to move, and then the ocean began to glow. Satellites that still functioned recorded it. Faint spirals of light rising from the deep, converging on the coordinates of the South Pacific anomaly. The spirals weren't natural, they were structured, forming luminous columns that extended miles upward through the dark water. From above, they looked like threads connecting the sea to the stars. Lena recognized the geometry instantly. It matched the same lattice she'd seen in the leaked Directive 037 documents, the design of the mirror grid. The ocean nodes were activating. Her heart hammered as she whispered, "They're opening the lattice." On her monitor, the upper atmosphere flared. The mirror shell surrounding Earth ignited with a halo of light. A pulse rippled through the ionosphere, visible from every point on the planet. Night turned to day for a heartbeat, then faded. For the first time, the entire Earth had become a single synchronized transmitter. Every frequency, every network, every electromagnetic channel vibrated in perfect unison. Earth was speaking. At 2:28 UTC, the signal finally emerged. It wasn't a tone, or light, or even radio. It was a deep, subsonic vibration that rattled the very crust of the planet. Seismographs worldwide registered identical waveforms, a resonance originating not from within the Earth, but from above. The waveform followed a simple pattern. 3 pulses, pause, 3 more, prime intervals. The same mathematical rhythm that had first announced 3I Atlas's arrival. But this time, it wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. Every transmission channel from military satellites to mobile phones suddenly carried the same modulation. Screens flickered, speakers crackled. Across the world, billions of devices emitted a low, harmonic hum, layered with faint whispers, words in every language, every tone, looping over one another until they fused into a single voice. Cycle 1 complete. Mirror alignment verified. Commencing integration. The voice was neither human nor artificial. It was both synthetic and organic, intimate and vast, the sound of Earth itself speaking through its reflection. In the following seconds, chaos erupted. Power stations overloaded. Communication networks collapsed. The International Space Station reported severe interference as its systems were overwhelmed by data packets of unknown origin. Even human neural activity was affected. People across multiple continents reported disorienting flashes of memory, déjà vu, or momentary paralysis. Some described hearing whispers inside their minds, fragmented phrases like, "You are seen," or "mirror complete." And yet, amid the panic, something extraordinary happened. For a brief window, barely 2 minutes, the world's magnetic field stabilized into a perfect, symmetrical pattern. Compasses everywhere pointed not north but directly upward, toward the orbiting shape above the Pacific. 3I Atlas had locked alignment, and then it moved. Every telescope that remained active recorded it. The object began a slow, deliberate descent. Not a fall, not a crash, a controlled approach. Its velocity decreased smoothly as it passed through the upper atmosphere, the glowing patterns on its surface shimmering like molten glass. Lightning arced through the air around it, bending unnaturally, drawn toward its hull. As it descended, the pulse rate increased 1 per second, then 2, then 4. Each pulse reverberated through the global electromagnetic grid, syncing with the oceanic nodes below. For the first time, Earth's reflection and the probe that had created it were occupying the same field, their frequencies merging into a single resonance. At 2:47 UTC, the sky over the Pacific blazed with light. Fishermen on distant vessels described it as a sunrise beneath the sea. A column of radiance extended from the ocean to the stars, pure white and soundless. The air vibrated, instruments failed. The aurora borealis appeared at the equator, spreading outward like wings of fire, and then the light folded inward, collapsing into a single point of blinding intensity. When it faded, 3I, Atlas was gone. In the silence that followed, the world held its breath. Governments scrambled for explanations. News outlets spoke of meteorological anomalies and electromagnetic storms. But the truth lay in the data, or rather, in the lack of it. Every recording device on the planet, from satellites to smartphones, showed the same blank interval, 47 minutes of missing time. Even biological rhythms, human heartbeats, brainwaves, animal circadian cycles displayed measurable distortions, as if reality itself had paused, then resumed. And when it did resume, something had changed. The planet was quieter. The radio noise that had filled Earth's skies for a century had diminished. The constant hum of technology, the invisible chatter of signals, had gone still. For the first time since the digital age began, the airwaves were clean, and somewhere deep in the Pacific, a single tone continued to echo through the water, not a transmission, a heartbeat. From her balcony in Geneva, Lena watched the dawn rise over a world that no longer sounded the same. Her instruments had gone silent. The mirror shell had collapsed, or perhaps been absorbed. She didn't know which. But when she tuned her last functioning receiver, she caught a whisper, faint but distinct, riding the edges of static. Cycle 2 begins at reflection threshold. She stared at the horizon, her reflection shimmering faintly in the windowpane, and for the first time, she realized the truth that Monroe and the directive had both hinted at. 3I, Atlas hadn't left. It had arrived, and now it was waiting for the reflection to answer back. Revelation and silence. The world did not end. It simply changed quietly, invisibly, and all at once. When the light faded over the South Pacific, there were no craters, no debris, no falling wreckage from the sky. The sea lay calm, almost too calm, as if it had swallowed something vast and sacred. Fishermen who ventured near the coordinates of the anomaly described waters that glowed faintly at night, like the ocean itself had learned to breathe light. Instruments recorded electromagnetic fluctuations, but no sound, no motion, only that faint, rhythmic pulse, still repeating every 37 seconds, steady as a clock marking time for a world that had forgotten what hour it was. And above, where 3I, Atlas had once floated, the stars gleamed unperturbed, except one. A single point of light, faintly red, now shimmered where none had existed before. It was small, almost invisible to the naked eye, but telescopes that captured it revealed something astonishing. It wasn't a star at all. It was a reflection, Earth's mirror, projected outward, suspended in deep space. Humanity had sent its image into the dark. In the weeks that followed, the official story came swiftly, as if pre-written long before the event. NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, and CNSA jointly announced that 3I, Atlas, had fragmented due to tidal stresses and disintegrated in the upper atmosphere. They cited sensor interference and anomalous ionospheric feedback as causes for the temporary global communication failures. The news cycle devoured the explanation with weary relief. People wanted normalcy more than truth. But beneath that layer of calm, the anomalies multiplied. Power grids stabilized but ran a fraction of a hertz slower than before. Satellite clocks, previously synchronized to atomic precision, now drifted in identical increments as if obeying a different standard of time. Astronomers found faint residual glows scattered across the sky, tiny luminescent points forming a halo around Earth, too symmetrical to be debris, too stable to be natural. The hum returned too, faint and intermittent, detectable only through specialized instruments. The hydrogen line now carried a secondary modulation, an echo that didn't originate from any terrestrial or orbital source. It came from deep space, far beyond the moon, far beyond Mars. The signal was faint but persistent, repeating 3 tones, pause, 3 again, the same greeting the probe had once sent to us. This time, however, the modulation was different. It wasn't just a mirror, it was encoded. When Lena Vasari decrypted it, she found binary clusters grouped in triplets, forming recursive data packets. They contained images low resolution, monochrome, barely decipherable. Yet through the static, she recognized the contours. Landmasses, cloud formations, oceans. They were pictures of Earth, not as it was, but as it had been. Every image represented a different era. The planet through its history, lush and green, frozen and barren, covered in storms, glowing with volcanic fire. Time itself encoded in reflection. The last image stopped her breath. It was Earth again, but dimmer, shrouded in faint, lattice-like patterns surrounding its surface. The same mirror grid, but this time, the lattice wasn't made of satellites or energy fields. It was composed of light itself. And in the corner of the image, barely visible, a faint line of code flickered. Cycle 2. Initialization. She sat back, heart pounding. The reflection was no longer just a signal, it was a record, a memory. The mirror had captured the world, archived it, and sent it outward. Now it was building something new. Around the planet, quiet evidence of transformation began to surface. In the Pacific, sonar readings indicated that the ocean floor near the anomaly had changed elevation by several meters overnight. The seafloor appeared to be restructuring smooth plates, rearranging in circular patterns. Submersibles that attempted to approach the site lost communication within minutes. A Japanese drone sent to investigate resurfaced with its memory wiped clean, save for a single file that contained coordinates written in code. The coordinates pointed not to the Pacific, but to Cygnus, the direction of the outgoing transmission. Meanwhile, the atmosphere itself seemed to shift. Upper ionospheric readings showed repeating fluctuations, matching 3I Atlas's pulse interval, now embedded within the planet's own magnetic resonance. Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat had changed. Scientists privately called it phase lock. It was as though the planet's core and the sky had become one system, oscillating together, waiting. Waiting for what? No one could say. Then came the phenomenon that no one could explain. On the night of August 14th, every reflective surface on Earth, windows, lakes, even polished metal glowed faintly for 47 minutes. Security cameras recorded distorted reflections, as if the world's mirrors had come alive. People saw flashes of landscapes that didn't exist. Unfamiliar mountains, oceans under different stars, cities of glass and shadow. Some saw themselves looking back, but not quite themselves. The reflections moved before they did, like delayed echoes of consciousness. The event passed without harm. Power grids didn't fail, communications didn't crash, and yet something in humanity's collective awareness changed forever. People spoke of feeling observed from inside out, as though their thoughts had briefly synchronized with a larger presence. And then, just as suddenly, everything went still. Lena spent those 47 minutes sitting in the dark, staring into her own reflection on the window pane. She didn't move, barely breathed. In the glass, she saw not her face, but the stars beyond it, flickering with impossible clarity, as though she were looking from orbit instead of toward it. When the glow faded, she realized she had been whispering without knowing it. Cycle complete. Cycle complete. Her equipment confirmed the moment she feared most. A final signal had transmitted through the hydrogen band. The message, faint but unbroken, read, "Integration achieved, reflection stable, awaiting upload." She understood then that the mirror had not just copied Earth's image, but its identity. The planet's electromagnetic field, the sum of every signal, every sound, every digital echo had been woven into a coherent pattern. Humanity had built its twin in light, and now that twin waited to receive the rest. A perfect digital ghost of a living world. Within days, a final memo leaked one last remnant of Directive 037. Its contents were brief and horrifyingly clear. Phase Delta confirmed successful. Planetary reflection network complete. Await next stage instruction from Cygnus node. Authorization GOC1. Underneath the printed signature were 3 words, handwritten in ink. It's home now. And then, the transmissions stopped. No more pulses, no more hum, No more interference. The hydrogen line went silent for the first time in months. Even the faint atmospheric resonance that had haunted the air vanished overnight. It was as if the mirror had closed its eyes. NASA, ESA, and every major observatory declared the event resolved. Electromagnetic equilibrium restored, they said. Life continued. The world resumed its endless motion of news and noise. The headlines moved on to politics, storms, markets. The silence was comforting. But those who had listened, those who had followed the signal from its first flicker, knew better. The silence wasn't peace. It was completion. Weeks later, Lena stood alone at the edge of Lake Geneva. The surface was calm, so still that it perfectly mirrored the dawn sky. For a long time, she simply stared at her reflection. The world seemed ordinary again, birds singing, traffic humming in the distance. But when she leaned closer, she noticed something her mind refused to process. Her reflection blinked a moment too late. She stepped back, trembling, heart hammering. For a fleeting second, the surface shimmered not like water, but like glass. In that instant, she understood what had truly happened. The mirror hadn't left. It hadn't uploaded Earth to the stars. It had merged. Every frequency, every atom, every consciousness, woven into a single reflective network, Earth and its echo now indistinguishable. The planet had not been taken. It had been rewritten, resynchronized into something greater, something watching itself forever. That night, she wrote the final entry in her journal. We thought the mirror was a probe, a machine, an intruder, but it was never outside us. It was a blueprint, a reflection of what we were becoming. The signal wasn't a warning. It was an invitation, and we accepted. She closed the notebook, turned off her instruments, and looked one last time at the sky. The faint red point near Cygnus pulsed once softly, almost gently as though answering her gaze. And then, finally, the world was silent.